And then I want to move on to Claude for the next question. Now we go into science policy. So Claude, what is the role of international diplomacy in mitigating the impacts of Arctic change? It's an easy question.
Very. Does it work? Yes. Thank you very much. Well, first, thank you, Interact, for organizing this event, and thank you to the Mission of Monaco. I want to acknowledge the dedication of Monaco also for mitigating climate change and for biodiversity. As we keep discussing the Treaty of the High Sea and its ratification, I wanted to praise Monaco for ratifying the BBNG. So you see, this is diplomacy. In effect, what is the role of diplomacy? And I'm not a scientist, so science diplomacy is a new form of diplomacy which is emerging. It's not new, but it's gaining more and more importance. And first I want to highlight that the Arctic is undergoing massive changes. That was part of your question. Massive transformations. Obviously, the impact of the climate change is impacting the physical conditions. You hear a lot about the wildfires, the permafrost thawing. That means that infrastructures are at risk. Infrastructures, these are the communities who can suffer from it. It can be critical infrastructure, it can be security infrastructure. So this is extremely critical in every sense. Another change that we observe in the Arctic, because I'm taking the big picture out of things, is the economic interest that there is in the Arctic, and which is growing from several parts of the world. It's no longer just the Arctic states looking at what resources there is inside the Arctic. It goes much further, and this interest in the resources of the Arctic is driven by geopolitical considerations, such as the notion of economic security. We see also security becoming center stage when you talk about the Arctic. We used to say that the Arctic had been set aside and immune to the Cold War, in the sense that even during the Cold War there was also cooperation between scientists, and the Arctic was the untouched land. And now we're seeing that tensions are being imported into the Arctic. Well, to give just a few examples, out of the 8 Arctic states, 7 have now become members. 7 altogether are members of NATO, and there is an increase of military drills and build-up. So, what does diplomacy have to do with that? Well, one of the effects of diplomacy was first to cut ties with one of the main Arctic states, Russia, because there was no way we could continue business as usual, given the war of aggression of Russia against Ukraine. And it's fair to acknowledge that one of the biggest casualties of this is the scientific community and the scientific cooperation. Half of the Arctic is in Russia, and 60% of the Russian territory sits on permafrost. So it's a huge loss, but continuing business as usual was not possible. Another effect of that diplomacy can have is to maintain the links. So there is this organization called the Arctic Council, which is still alive. It went through a very shaky time in 2022, and there was a successful transition of chairship from Russia to Norway, and it's the Arctic Council still continue to work, not at ministerial level, but the like-minded states are active, and the permanent parties as well. and they are very important also in this construction. So it is very important that we keep a forum where Arctic states, like-minded, permanent parties, observers, like Italy is an observer, the EU is an aspiring observer, de facto observer, but observers can have a very strong contribution. And to take the example of the EU, the Commission participates in several working groups that are related to science and climate change. So that's very important. And of course, what diplomacy can do is specifically science diplomacy. Science diplomacy means encouraging the cooperation between scientists across the world. So again, we've lost part of the Arctic, but it is more than ever necessary to have a very close cooperation between scientists from like-minded partners. And one of the key subjects on which there can be unity, agreement to cooperate all together, whatever the administration in place or about to take office, is clearly issues like wildfires, permafrost. These are very important things, the impact of permafrost, for example. So there is huge room for science diplomacy to be active in those troubled times.
Thank you. Thank you for this overview of geopolitical matters that is very important, also for us running around on the ground. So if you try to zoom in on the ground level, what do you need in order to make decisions, and how can Interact be a partner and help? Are there any gaps that we can help address together?
I think Interact has already been very active. Yeah. Interact has already been very active. I mean, the fact that you have all these stations where scientists can gather, meet, is essential. What is important is that there's really the networking also with other organizations. So maybe Copernicus wanted to have closer link with Interact. I think there was a roadmap for the future issued by Copernicus that would be important to take into account. So that's what I would say is extremely important. And also, I know that Interact has fully integrated the indigenous dimension. I think that it's been repeated in the Arctic Future Symposium that took place yesterday and the day, was it today? Now I'm mixing up the days. Yesterday and the day before. It is essential that the indigenous communities and the local communities are part of the research and also can benefit from the research. The data needs to be shared with them, so we support entirely this element.
Okay.